This video will take you through a few scenarios to understand the Unleashed to QuickBooks Online workflow. Let's first look at a few important reminders. Please note that only completed transactions are sent from Unleashed to QuickBooks. These transactions will be in the open or unapplied status in QuickBooks. Please ensure that your taxes are mapped correctly in order for the integration to work as expected. Please also ensure that your customers have not been archived. Let's look at a few scenarios regarding purchasing. A completed purchase order in Unleashed will send a bill to QuickBooks. So, looking in Unleashed, we will see we have purchase order 07, which has been completed. Please note that the order date is the date that will be sent to QuickBooks. The payment terms will be used to calculate the due date in QuickBooks. When looking at the bill that was passed to QuickBooks, we can see the order date, the due date, and then also the reference to the Unleashed transaction. The next scenario is for a completed purchase order, which includes costs for the same supplier as whom you purchased the products from. This will send a bill to QuickBooks. So here we can see that we have Trisha's Trinkets as the supplier for the product as well as the cost line. So looking at the bill in QuickBooks, we can see that there is a payable for Trisha's Trinkets for the product as well as the cost. Our next scenario is for a completed purchase order, which includes costs for a different supplier to whom you purchased the products from. This will send a bill for supplier 1 and a bill for supplier 2 to QuickBooks. So here we can see that we have Depot Didello as the supplier for the product line and Ranwell Megastore for the supplier of the cost line. So looking at QuickBooks, we can see that there is a bill for Depot Didello as well as a bill for Ranwell Megastore for the cost. A completed supplier return in Unleashed will send a supplier credit to QuickBooks. So here we can see that we have a supplier return for Berry Boutique in Unleashed. When we look at QuickBooks, we will see the supplier credit related to the supplier return for Berry Boutique. A completed supplier return in Unleashed that includes costing for the same supplier as whom you purchased the products from will send a supplier credit to QuickBooks. So here we have a supplier return for Trisha's Trinkets, which includes costs for Trisha's Trinkets too. Also note that we have opted to refund the costs instead of writing them off. So when we look at QuickBooks, we will see the supplier credit for Trisha's Trinkets for that supplier return. A completed supplier return in Unleashed that includes costing for a different supplier from whom you purchased the products from will send a supplier credit for supplier 1 as well as a supplier credit for supplier 2. So looking at supplier return 03 in Unleashed, we can see that we are returning goods for Depot Didello and refunding costs for Ranwell Megastore. Looking at QuickBooks, you will see a supplier credit for the goods that we are returning to Depot Didello, as well as a supplier credit for the costs that are being refunded to Ranwell Megastore. Let's look at a few scenarios for inventory. A completed stock adjustment in Unleashed will send a journal to QuickBooks. So here we can see stock adjustment 02 in Unleashed. Please note that the value will need to be positive or negative to send a journal. If the value is 0, then no journal will be sent. Once it is sent to QuickBooks, we can see the journal for stock adjustment 02. A completed stock take in Unleashed will also send a journal to QuickBooks. So here we can see stock take 01 in Unleashed, and I've also included the variance report below. As with the stock adjustment, please note that the value will need to be either positive or negative to send a journal. If the value is 0, then no journal will be sent. Once it is sent to QuickBooks, we can see the journal for StockTake 01. Let's look at a few scenarios regarding sales. A completed invoice in Unleashed will send an invoice to QuickBooks. So here we have sales invoice 126 in Unleashed. Please note that the invoice date will be sent to QuickBooks. The payment terms will be used to calculate the due date. So when that is passed to QuickBooks, we will have invoice 126 with the date and the due date pulled through from Unleashed. A completed shipment in Unleashed will send a journal to QuickBooks. So looking at shipment 126 in Unleashed, we can see that the dispatch date is 27th of November, which will be sent to QuickBooks. Let's now look at QuickBooks, and we can see the journal for that shipment, and we can also see that the dispatch date has been fed through. A credit in Unleashed that does not include goods being returned will send a credit note for the customer to QuickBooks. So here we have credit note 01 in Unleashed for LMH Industries, and we can see that we have not selected the return checkbox. When we look at the transaction in QuickBooks, we can see the credit note for LMH Industries. If you are returning goods as part of the credit in Unleashed, a credit note and a journal will be sent to QuickBooks. So here we have credit note 02 in Unleashed for Wade's Apparel, and we can see that we have selected the return checkbox. When we look at the transaction in QuickBooks, we can see that the credit note for Wade's Apparel is there, as well as a journal for them. Let's look at the notes for customers. A new customer created in Unleashed will send a customer contact to QuickBooks. So here I have created test 01 in Unleashed, and when we look at QuickBooks, we will be able to see test 01 under contacts. Let's look at the notes for suppliers. A new supplier created in Unleashed will send a supplier contact to QuickBooks. So here I have created test 02 in Unleashed, and when we look at QuickBooks, we will be able to see test 02 under contacts. Remember to check the Unleashed help files for more information on the QuickBooks integration.